It is so good to be a part of a church that believes in missions and practices missions, not only from the giving part of it, but also in the involvement part of it. And I appreciate the elders. I appreciate the staff that prioritizes what missions is. You know, a church that is looking outside of its own walls is a giving church, and a giving church is a living church. And so we want to continue to be that. And I want to encourage you to meet and talk with our missionaries today. Perhaps you've watched on YouTube or television the Chosen TV series. We've even had it shown here, I think, and through one of our classes. It's a series on the life of Christ. If you haven't seen it, if you have seen any of it, you can't help but notice, be aware of the character of Matthew. Okay? See, some of you laugh. You gotta know, okay, about this Matthew apostle in this show. The show portrays him as a brilliant guy, but a little different. Okay? Now, the Bible tells us virtually nothing about the personality of Matthew, but we do know before being called to be an apostle, he was a tax collector. And tax collectors were considered traitors by their fellow Jews, for they collected taxes for the hated Romans. So more likely, Matthew, during at least his adult years, lived much of his life as an outsider or as socially unacceptable. He was on the fringe. He was one of the disenfranchised. He was an unaccepted outsider. And some would claim that Matthew in his gospel includes Jesus encounters that also include other outsiders. Many of his healings and the encounters have to do with the disenfranchised, the outcasts of society, or those who didn't fit into the normal, acceptable mold of what a good Hebrew was. And interestingly enough, it was the upstanding church leaders of the day, the Pharisees, that had the most problems with Jesus and the people with whom he associated with and spent time with. So what was it that made Jesus so irresistible, so desirable to the undesirables? And if we claim to be followers of Jesus, then what is it about him that we can apply in our own lives and ministries to reach those same types of people? Our message passage this morning serves kind of as a summary of the section of chapter 8 and 9, where in rapid fire succession, Matthew gives encounters of where Jesus had encounters with people, and often some of these people are those outcasts, and he's doing healings and he's doing miracles with their life in those chapters. And then at the end of chapter 9, it's kind of a summary passage. I'm going to ask you, if you have your Bible, turn to Acts 9, and if you don't, it's up on the screen. But we're going to read these 4 verses of Matthew 9, 35 through 38. Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues and preaching the good news of the kingdom and healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field." Now, the primary aim of this message would be for us to develop an attitude toward people that matches the attitude of Jesus. And what do we see that attitude being? It's found in one word. We're going to key in on this word this morning. It said that he had what? Compassion on them. Compassion on them. May we leave here this morning choosing to see the world with the compassionate eyes of Jesus. Because when we do, then we will do what Jesus does. And we will pray for more people to do the same. So let's look at this word compassion. compassion. It's the Greek word splagnidzomai, okay? Now, this is an interesting word, okay? Because it probably, you got to kind of do a little back of the throat thing with it, all right? Splagnidzomai, okay? You know? All right, so you're going to say this word. We're going to learn a little Greek this morning, all right? So say it with me. Splagnidzomai. All right. Very good. You all are great Greek scholars, okay? In our culture, we associate the heart with this deep-seated emotions, don't we? In Jesus' culture, it was the gut. It was the bowels. That the body part was associated with the strong love and pity. So I see here this morning, some of us guys have a lot of splagnidzomai, okay? And it is growing, isn't it? Yes. So Jesus was moved in his gut toward them. The word can even be said, with that kind of portrayal, right? It was an aching, if you would, of compassion. Jesus uses the term in at least Matthew, uses the term in at least 5 different places at different occasions as he chronicles Jesus' interaction with the crowds and with individuals. So it wasn't just a one-time thing. The strong compassion of Jesus sees people as harassed and helpless, as sheep without a shepherd. So if we think about this word harassed, it would be easy for a flock of sheep to be harassed by dogs, by wild cats, by bears. Sheep don't know where to turn when they're attacked, and they just run in scattered directions. They are easy prey. Jesus saw the people of Galilee as harassed. They were harassed by those who would require them to obey an intricate law system of which they couldn't follow. The legalistic ways of the Pharisees left their religion a complicated list of do's and don'ts. Thus they were harassed with a load of guilt that they were unable to bear. And isn't that the way legalism works? Legalism leads to frustration and to defeatism and to confusion. No one ever is good enough, and somebody's always got another rule to follow. But harassment also came from Rome. These monotheistic people were being ruled by the heathen, polytheistic, iron-fisted Roman Empire. They were taxed against their will, and any unrest was put quickly out with force. Ultimately, though, it's Satan who harasses people. He snips at a heel here. He trips up a sheep there. He runs through the middle of culture, spreading his lies and his deceit. Is it any wonder that our culture is filled with confusion and depression and anxiety and hate and violence? With us this morning is Crockett Davidson. Crockett spoke at our men's gathering yesterday. He's the regional director with Stadia, and Stadia is an organization that recruits and assesses and equips church planters. It has a vision to see that every child has a church worldwide. Isn't that an awesome vision? Planting healthy churches is key to gathering God's flock because new churches reach those that are unreached. Existing churches, we kind of gather our own, but new churches reach the unreached, those that are on the fringe, those that are at the outside of God's flock. The Four Rivers Church is a church that we support in New Hampshire. It's a new church. It's a Stadia church plant that seeks to reach the unchurched and those who have been hurt by the church. In that part of the country, Satan has done a good job of harassing. And people are slow to trust the church, and they don't even have Christ on their radar. So Wes and Casey Dillon have been working hard at developing relationships with people through humanitarian projects. Not doing the projects for the people, but enlisting community people to do humanitarian projects. People want to do good things. And so they have enlisted their community in doing things like providing clean water, maybe to Africa or someplace like that, or to raise money for other benevolent causes. And as they do these fundraisers and so forth, they are building relationships, and a foundation of trust is laid upon which then the gospel can be shared. The last couple of weeks, on the news, we've heard where Americans were kidnapped and shot in Mexico. Travel warnings have gone out for various parts of Mexico. Satan is doing his job in spreading violence and fear, isn't he? Impacto Latino is a church planting organization that recruits national Mexican church planters, equips them, trains them, oversees them, and sends them out to plant churches in Mexico. A new church started during COVID, and it's called El Ancla. You know what that means in Spanish? Anchor. Coincidence? Maybe not. It's the first church in the growing suburban area. And I don't know if their city is experiencing any cartel activity. I need to ask Eric and Dee Duggins. Where are you guys? Are you guys in this service? They will be in another one here. But we can tell that Mexico needs Christ. People are harassed. But here's a question for us. Do we compassionately see the unsaved people in our neighborhoods, our workplace, our clubs, organizations we're involved in, even our families? Do we see them as harassed? And do we see them as helpless? A sheep that has fallen or been knocked down onto its back is unable to roll over and stand back up. I don't know why God made them that way. But when they're knocked over like that, they're called downcast. And it's a helpless condition. Unless a shepherd helps this sheep, it could die in that state. Jesus saw people that way too. The people were at the mercy of the whims of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. They were ruled by oppressive Roman law. Undoubtedly, people often felt oppressed and helpless in Jesus' day. You know, the women and the men who come to a pregnancy resource center often feel helpless. They may fear that they have a sexually transmitted disease or an unplanned pregnancy, and they don't know what to do or to whom to turn. There's a state of helplessness there. And PRC partners with them to show them that there is help and that there is hope, and their life and the life of their child matter, and they don't have to take the journey alone. There is help out there. This past December, Rob Cooper, the principal of Bonita Springs Elementary, which we partner with, helping out in different ways, told me that how Ian had disrupted some of the families in their school. What happens when a large family's home, their rental home, is destroyed by the hurricane, as well as their place of employment? They're homeless, and they're jobless, and they can't afford to go outside of the area where the rents are much more expensive. Talk about feelings of helplessness. And Love in the Name of Christ, Love Inc. is here in Bonita to assist the residents of Bonita who fall on helpless, hard times like that. It helps connect these people with churches and the services that they are in need of that can help them in their time of need. And these are physical needs that we need to be involved in and are involved in as a church. But let our compassionate eyes not miss those who are spiritually helpless as well. Because we live in a relatively affluent area, and many people look perfectly healthy and comfortable on the outside, but on the inside, they are dead. They are carrying their own weight of sin and guilt and shame, and they cannot do anything about it. They are headed for a Christless eternity in hell. Does our gut hurt for them? We are to be the hands, feet, and heart of Jesus. But we might want to scribble in there, we need to be the mouth of Jesus also. People need us to communicate the good news of the kingdom, just like Jesus did. Physical needs, yes. Spiritual needs, yes. Both and. Jesus saw the people as harassed, and he saw them as helpless, and he saw them as sheep without a shepherd. Sheep without a shepherd are basically abandoned. Their helplessness requires that they have a leader. Someone to direct them to food and to water, someone to protect them from outer harm, and someone to really kind of protect them from themselves. Jesus was and is the good shepherd, isn't he? He shepherded the people by addressing both their physical and their spiritual needs. He healed them. He delivered them from demonization. He taught them the truth and the good news about the kingdom. And now, he has left that shepherding to his church. He calls each of us to do our part in shepherding the harassed and the helpless sheep. The compassion of Christ moves us to make a difference in someone's life. So I ask you to hear this morning, who do you know that's hurting? Who do you know that's been beaten up by life, that's been harassed? Who do you know who's cruising through life with no direction or in the wrong direction and is headed straight for a Christless eternity? These are the people that God would have us shepherd. Be a gentle shepherd too. These people need us as a church to mercifully meet the needs as well as provide the biblical answers for life's questions. I don't know about you, though, but the issues, the struggles, the hardships that plague our culture and world kind of overwhelm me sometimes. When I hear about the staggering figures of human trafficking and enslavement and drugs and pornography and mental illness, and you could go on, when we see the devastation of war and earthquakes and floods and hurricanes, it seems so overpowering and out of our control. It's overwhelming. What can we do? And if we let it, we can let it get us depressed, and that would lead to just complacency. We become the ones that feel helpless to do anything. And maybe you felt that way before, but Jesus would have us look differently at it. There is a positive aspect to the lostness of the masses. Look at verse 37 and 38. He said, "Then he said to his disciples, 'The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest field.'" Jesus says the harvest is plentiful. He agrees the need is great. And he acknowledges the need for reinforcements. He says, no, you can't do it on your own. But then he directs us to the one who can provide the needed resources. And he says, pray the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into the harvest. Jonah and Leslie Bogus are alumni. They're here with us. They're serving with us. But they're alumni of Johnson University, Florida. Johnson is a Christian school committed to equipping men and women to go into the harvest fields and care for the physical and the spiritual needs of humanity. They not only equip people for vocational ministry, but other vocational fields as well. New International is a mission-sending organization. Jim and Svetlana Vogel, David and Mara Pickering, and Cassie Smith are all missionaries we support who are under the New International umbrella. Jim and David and Mara, as you heard David talk this morning, are currently being used to assist people to get on the field and to stay on the field. They provide training and counsel for missionaries around the world who are doing the compassionate work of Christ. They are shepherds of the shepherds. And if you were to ask Johnson University or New International what the world needs, they would wholeheartedly say additional laborers. More men and women moved by the compassion of Christ who want to see the kingdom of God come on earth as it is in heaven. So what does Jesus ask us to do? Simply pray. Pray for additional laborers. And perhaps we could do this. Think about this. The next time we're watching the news and that you get that twinge of being overwhelmed by all the evil in the world, or the next time we feel helpless to do anything, why don't we just stop and pray to the Lord of the harvest to send forth laborers into his harvest field? Just stop and pray for laborers. You know, the word translated ask in the NIV or to pray earnestly in the English Standard Version is a word that in many other places is translated beg. And this seems to be more than just kind of a casual, polite ask, or request. Oh, by the way, God, would you send laborers into harvest field? If you want to, if it's not too much bother. There seems to be an emotional urgency attached to it, a pleading, if you will. What would happen? What would happen if the members of Anchor Christian Church began to beg God to plead with him for additional laborers for each of the ministries that we support? Crockett, could you use more church planners? Could you guys use more volunteers and paid staff at Lake Aurora? Steve and Phyllis got up at 4 something this morning to come here. What if they had people that were doing that for them? I mean, they've already put in their work week, right? And then they get up, they're here. What if we allowed the splagnisma of Jesus to direct our prayers? Do we think that God would hear the sincere prayers like that? Would he answer the pleading prayers of his children? Bet he would. God can provide the volunteers. God can provide the paid staff. God can provide the resources to pay them. We have not because we ask not. One of the ways God answers the prayer for laborers is through places like Lake Aurora Church Camp. God uses places like Lake Aurora Christian Camp and Retreat Center to call people into various kinds of ministry. I contribute my own calling to being at church camp. Children and adults come to saving faith and are baptized during and after programs held at Lake Aurora. Relational healing takes place in families and friendships during retreats. Lake Aurora provides the place and environment and programs for the compassion of Christ to be poured out and God to work in people's lives. The missions and the missionaries that Anchor support seek to be a conduit for the compassion of Christ in one or more of the aspects that we've talked about this morning. And I want to encourage you to visit their tables this morning. Hear more about what they're passionate about. Don't leave here without talking to somebody. To be honest with you, it's a dishonor to them. And it honors them to have people inquisitive about what they're about and what we are about because we are partners with them. We would love to see hearts connect with the various missions that we have. And so may the compassion Christ has for lost people, may that compassion just overwhelm us. For when his splagnismai becomes the way we too look at people, we will do what Jesus does. And we will pray for others to do the same. Father, thank you for inviting us, and even more than that, calling us into a relationship with you, but also into a relationship to take your love, your compassion to the world, be it next door or be it across the globe. Move us, Lord, individually. Move us as a church. Spread that compassion.
Let's stand together. Let's sing. The goodness, the glory, the majesty, the grace of God.